Hey everyone, and welcome back to the English Prep Podcast. Today we're diving deep into something I know a lot of you have been asking about. How to read faster in English, without losing all that comprehension that you worked so hard for.
It's a huge question, isn't it? Especially if you're prepping for those big exams like TOEFL and IELTS, or maybe just trying to enjoy a good book without it feeling like a week-long marathon.
Right, there's so much to read, whether it's for studying or work, or even just like keeping up with the news and current events.
It can feel overwhelming, but the good news is that becoming a faster, more efficient reader, it really is a learnable skill.
Okay, so let's break this down for our listeners. Why is speed so important, especially for those of you who are still learning English?
I think the most obvious benefit is, well, time. Think about it. The faster you can read and still understand what you're reading, the more you can get through. And that means more time for other things, whether that's more studying or just having some fun.
Right, like it's all about making the most of your study time. Right, but it's not just about cramming in more material. There's something deeper going on too, isn't there?
Absolutely. When you train yourself to read faster, you're also training your brain to focus better. You have to be more engaged with the text, filter out those distractions, and really hone in on what's important.
Oh yeah, I've definitely noticed that. Like when I'm struggling to get through something, my mind tends to wander. But when I'm reading at a good clip and everything's clicking, I'm way more focused and I actually remember more.
Exactly. And that better focus leads to better learning overall, right? You're absorbing more information, you're retaining more, and that's what it's all about.
And I imagine for those big exams like the TOEFL and IELTS, being a fast reader is pretty much essential.
It's a game changer, really. Think about those tight time limits they have on the reading sections. If you can zoom through those passages and still grasp the main ideas, you'll have so much more time to tackle the questions. That can make a huge difference in your score.
Okay, so we've established why speed is so important. Now, let's get to the practical stuff. How can our listeners actually start reading faster without sacrificing comprehension?
There are so many great techniques out there, but let's start with two that I think are foundational: skimming and scanning.
Yeah, those are words I've heard before, but I'm not always sure I'm using them correctly. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. Skimming is basically like a quick preview. You're not reading every word, you're just trying to get a general sense of the text. So you might read the intro, the conclusion, maybe the first sentence of each paragraph. It's great for when you need to decide if something's worth reading in more detail.
So if you're trying to figure out if an article's relevant to your research, you'd skim it first.
Exactly. Now, scanning is a bit different. With scanning, you're actually looking for a very specific piece of information. So maybe you need a date, a name, a particular keyword. You're just letting your eyes dart across the page until you find what you need.
Got it. Skimming for the big picture, scanning for the details. Those are definitely good starting points. What else can our listeners do?
Building a strong vocabulary is absolutely essential. The more words you recognize instantly, the less you have to stop and think, and the smoother your reading becomes.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So how do you suggest people go about expanding their vocabularies?
Well, there's the classic advice: read, read, read. And I don't just mean any old thing. Challenge yourself with more complex texts, newspapers, magazines, things like that.
So it's not just about quantity, it's about quality too, right?
Absolutely. And then, those old school flashcards, they still work wonders. Or you can use one of the many vocabulary apps out there. But the real key is to pay attention to context. When you encounter a new word, try to figure out what it means based on the words around it.
That way you're not just memorizing a definition, you're understanding how the word actually functions in a sentence.
Right. It's all about making those connections. And speaking of connections, here's a tip you might not expect. Use a pointer while you read.
A pointer? Like you mean actually using my finger to follow along?
Exactly. Or a pen, or even your mouse cursor if you're reading on a screen. It sounds kind of silly, but it really helps to keep your eyes focused and moving smoothly across the page.
I've never tried that, but I can see how it would cut down on those times when your eyes jump back to reread a line. What about timed reading? I know a lot of people swear by that.
Timed reading is great for building speed. Set a timer for, say, a minute or two, and read a passage as quickly as you can while still understanding it. Then, take a minute to summarize what you just read. This helps you track your progress and make sure you're not just speeding through without absorbing anything.
So you're constantly checking in with yourself, making sure you're actually getting it. I like that. What about the tech side of things? Are there any apps or programs that can help people read faster?
Oh, definitely. There are tons of them out there. Some focus on minimizing eye movements by flashing words on the screen. Others use different techniques. It's worth exploring to see what works for you.
So many options. It's almost like there's an app for everything these days. And I imagine the environment where you're reading also plays a role.
Oh, for sure. Make sure you have a quiet, comfortable space with good lighting. If you're reading online, think about using a browser extension to block those distracting websites.
No more endless scrolling. So we've talked about techniques, technology, environment. What about just plain old habit building? How important is it to make reading a regular part of your routine?
It's huge. Like any skill, consistency is key. The more you read, the faster, more efficient you'll become. So set aside some time each day, even if it's just for a few minutes, and stick to it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of great tips. Now let's flip the script a little bit.
Yeah.
What are some common challenges that English learners might face when they're trying to read faster?
One big one is subvocalization. That's when you silently say the words to yourself as you read. It can feel like it helps you understand, but it actually slows you down. Because you're limited by how fast you can talk in your head.
Oh, I think I do that. What's the trick to breaking that habit?
It takes practice. Try focusing on reading phrases or chunks of words instead of individual words. Or give your mind something else to do while you read, like counting or even chewing gum.
Interesting. It's like tricking your brain into letting go of that need to hear each word. What about the fear of losing comprehension? I think that's a big one for a lot of people.
Of course. Don't try to go from 0 to 60 overnight. Gradually increase your speed and keep checking in with yourself. If you're not understanding, slow down a bit. It's all about finding that sweet spot where you're reading quickly but still absorbing the information.
So it's not a race. It's about finding a sustainable pace that works for you.
Exactly. Another common trap is over-relying on rereading. If you don't understand something the first time, it's tempting to go back and read it again and again, but that eats up so much time. Try to force yourself to focus on understanding as much as possible on that first pass.
Makes sense. And what about when you just start to feel tired or your concentration starts to slip?
Take breaks. Even a minute or two to stand up, stretch, get some fresh air. It makes a huge difference. And don't be afraid to start with shorter reading sessions and gradually build up your stamina.
Okay, those are some great tips for overcoming those common hurdles. Now, what about for those listeners who are already pretty comfortable with the basics and want to take things to the next level? What are some more advanced strategies they can try?
One really cool technique is called chunking. It's about training your eyes to see groups of words as units of meaning rather than focusing on individual words. So instead of reading, "the cat sat on the mat," you're seeing "the cat sat on the mat."
Wow, that's interesting. It's almost like turning words into little mini phrases.
Exactly. And with practice, your brain can start processing these chunks much faster, which really speeds up your overall reading. Another powerful technique is visualization. As you read, try to create pictures in your mind of what's happening.
So you're actively engaging your imagination, turning the words into a movie in your head.
Exactly. It makes the reading more fun, and it can really help with memory, too. And then don't underestimate the power of self-assessment. Keep track of your reading speed, maybe use a timer, and count how many words you can read in a minute. And afterwards, always check your comprehension.
So you're basically keeping yourself accountable and motivated to keep improving.
Right. And finally, if you can, join or even start an English reading group. Discussing what you've read with others is a fantastic way to solidify your understanding and get different perspectives.
That's a great idea. Okay, let's come full circle and talk about those big English exams again, TOEFL and IELTS. How can our listeners specifically apply all of these strategies to ace those tests?
First and foremost, familiarize yourself with the format of the reading section. Take some practice tests under timed conditions so you know what to expect. And when you're practicing, work on those key skills, identifying main ideas, finding supporting details, and summarizing.
So it's about more than just speed. It's about those specific reading comprehension skills that those tests are designed to measure.
Absolutely. And remember, those passages can be pretty dense. It's okay to slow down a bit for those more challenging texts, and then speed back up when you're working with something easier.
So being adaptable is key.
Exactly. With practice, you'll get better and better at adjusting your pace to the demands of the text.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of faster reading. So much great information for our listeners. And I think the biggest takeaway is that it really is possible to become a faster reader without sacrificing comprehension. It just takes a bit of effort and the right strategies.
I completely agree. Don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight. Keep practicing, keep experimenting with different techniques, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Well said. To all of our listeners out there on the English Prep Podcast, we hope you found this deep dive helpful and inspiring. Remember, reading quickly and efficiently is a skill that can truly transform your English learning journey. So go out there and start practicing. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What are some of the biggest reading challenges you face? What techniques are you most excited to try? Until next time, happy reading, everyone.